Welcome to Mining the Media, providing nuggets of news and cutting-edge questions and answers, minus the political blather. Here are your hosts, G.K. Allen and Dave Jeffers.
Welcome to a special episode of Mining the Media. I'm Dave Jeffers. That's G.K. Allen. We're your co-host. I'm the producer. He's the creator. And I came up with this idea of special episodes. We'll have lots of special guests that you've seen, but I wanted to take advantage of what I am describing, as you saw in the lead-in, the musical meanderings, memories, and musings of G.K. Allen. And the meanderings are the different travels, the places G.K.'s been, the jobs he's had in reference to music and radio. The memories, he has an encyclopedic memory. He will just revel me at times when I'm driving home or we're just chatting on the phone or when we're visiting, and my wife is from the era of music that we like, and he just drops some of these interesting stories. And then sometimes he just has opinions or musings, things he remembers about music. And so I just thought it'd be fun. To do this, and we're just going to pick your brain. And there's going to be episodes when I'm just going to start throwing bands out at you. And you're just going to tell me, yeah, whatever. But before we get that far down the road, how did G.K. Allen, we know you were a drummer, but how did all that begin? How did you get into music? How did you become G.K. Allen, the myth, the legend?
Right now, I'm kind of thinking like from the old Mary Tyler Moore show, Ted Baxter would give you the story of how he started on a little radio station.
I love Ted.
Oh, he was fantastic. There's a guy here on local television. I won't identify which channel, but I swear Tampa has its own version of Ted Baxter, 2021. Well, Lou, basically, I'm going to start at the beginning.
Good place.
Because it really was, it's amazing how little kids can be, they can grab onto things at a very, very young age and hold on to it for life. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of my grandson, who basically has been into dinosaurs since he was 3 days old. He's about to be a sophomore in college. On a very serious level, I owe a lot to my parents. They used to do a radio show. My dad was working at Rensselaer Polytechnic. He was responsible for a lot of the promotion when the ice shows came to town or the NHL teams came for an exhibition game, whatever. He was doing a lot of PR. This is a long time ago. Up in Troy, New York, a place that has very nasty winters. So in any event, I was 4.5 years old. My parents did a daily talk show for about 15 minutes. It followed the Arthur Godfrey National Show. It was called Ad-Libbing with the Allens. The call letters of the station at the time were WOKO, broadcasting from the Wellington Hotel in Albany, New York. The Wellington was where everybody who mattered would get together, all the politicians, because the capital, this, that, and the other thing. So parents would bring me into the studio, and this was back in the days when they still had tubes that glowed in the dark, mm-hmm. and they had to have more than one engineer, and they were doing a talk show, and they had a little table, and the guests would often be there, then a local mayor, the local senator, the governor, whoever. And there was also in those days, a lot of radio stations still had live music, and they would have bands on weekends playing jazz and that sort of music. There was a piano that did not have a cover over the keys, and my mother would put me on top of the piano bench, and she would say to me, point to the on-air light, when that light is on, you be very, very quiet. You have to be quiet. Mm-hmm. So to make a long story somewhat shorter, I fell in love with radio because of its visual nature. At 2.5, I was captivated by the glow from the other side of the glass where the various engineers were. I knew my parents were talking to people. I was 2.5. I didn't have a total concept of what was going on, but I know that visually I found it very, very stimulating. From that interest in music and radio and how everything was affecting me, at a very young age, I got into music. Somewhere in this world, there's a picture of me at the age of 3 with my very first Victrola playing records. And according to my parents, God bless the two of them because they're not around anymore, both of them said that the first song I was ever hooked on as a little boy was The Shrimp Boats Are Coming.
The what?
The Shrimp Boats Are Coming. It was a novelty song in the early 50s with a huge hit. The Shrimp Boats Are Coming. That. Oh, it's an awful song, but that was my favorite. So in any event, thankfully, a few years after that, Bill Haley and Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and Eddie Cochran and Jerry Lee Lewis came along, Fats Domino, and the music got a heck of a lot better. But in terms of my love of music, it began with my love of the visual nature of radio. And parallel to that, I got into talk radio and rock and roll radio pretty much at the same time. And when people talk about Rush Limbaugh, God rest his soul, they often give him credit for something he wasn't. He did not create talk radio. He was very, very successful and very good at what he did. Absolutely. You don't last that long if you're not. But people like Barry Farber, Long John Neville, they were around the gamblings, the various gamblings out of New York City and WOR, and so on and so forth. He did not invent talk radio the way Elvis did not invent rock and roll, but they both did a good job of popularizing.
Right.
And were very, very significant. And I think it is a shame that, the world does not have Rush, because I believe Rush Limbaugh's greatest strength was his sense of humor.
Oh, and yeah.
I'm serious when I say that. He had a very good, almost British sense of humor.
Yeah, he was entertaining. He was educating. He could energize you. I mean, I'm alliterating all these E's, but yeah, he was a trailblazer as far as making talk radio commercially successful.
And a lot of AM stations owe him a lot because AM was on its deathbed.
Yeah, that's what you could have to tell him. He saved AM radio. Pretty much.
Well, he was at least 50% responsible. There were others who were also very good. Sure. He was certainly the primary figure. Yes.
Well, I can tell you out west where I grew up. I don't remember Rush when he was at Sacramento. I think by then I was in the Army. I know for sure because he started back in mid to late 80s out in Sacramento where his first big show started. But I can tell you the radio stations that we listened to on AM out in California was KFRC. It was the big radio station out of San Francisco. Dr. Don Rose, one of the most famous DJs, AM DJs, and they just played all the top 40, top 100 type songs. But then FM came along in late 70s when I was in college. I discovered FM, and
where the disc jockeys talked a whole lot differently.
Yeah, but we had some great disc jockeys out in the Bay Area. But yeah, that definitely changed it. So how did you get into all of that? I mean, you were maybe I jumped ahead.
Well, basically, from the time the seed was planted by being that little boy in the radio station when my mother and father were doing their talk show, then shortly after that, I lived in a market where we got a lot of music stations out of New York, Philadelphia. It was between the two. When rock and roll started kicking off, basically in 1954, 1956, I'd be listening in the daytime to various jocks in New York City or Philly, the Geeter with the Heater, Murray the K. Kaufman, the Ronettes were his dancing girls, that sort of. We got stacks and stacks of golden wax, that sort of.
Yeah.
A great new band from England Kansas City Boys. But in any event, so I got hooked on rock and roll radio, obviously, and I'm sure, Dave, you remember it, and most people who are going to be listening to my voice right now, many of them remember it as well. Long before there was cable television, long before there was rock and roll videos to a great extent. Night, 50,000 watt AM stations could be heard for miles and miles and miles. And I'd pick up stations every so often out of Jacksonville, WAPE, 690 on the dial. I'd get stations out of New Orleans, stations out of Cincinnati and Cleveland. And I got literally hooked on rock and roll, even though rock and roll started really in 1954 and 5, when I was just 5 or 6. I got hooked on it that early. And I still have a lot of the original records from that era as well, including some that actually were 78. So I got hooked on rock and roll radio. My father hated rock and roll. Would always make fun of it. Never stopped me from listening to it. He would just turn that. And my mother kind of liked it. Mom had good taste in music. She liked Creedence Clearwater Revival and the Rolling Stones. So she was cool when it comes to music.
Yeah.
And in any event, I also loved big band music, even though it was from a much earlier generation. And my brother, as you know, my brother Glenn, he died in February of 2020, but for his entire life, literally from probably the age of 4th grade on, my brother was in a band, either as a drummer or a producer. He was a songwriter. He was involved in music virtually his entire life. I mean, he literally dedicated himself. And he was a very, very good drummer in a lot of good bands out of New York. Diamond Debris, a band I was with, Baby Moon, the earlier version of Diamond Debris, the Floor Models, and the French Cook and Blues Band. And Glenn and I, when we were kids, we would be sitting listening to my records, and we would be tapping wherever we could tap along to the songs. And along comes a hit record. It was one of the few jazz records ever to be a hit single, Topsy Part 2 by Cozy Cole, where in the beginning of the song, it's the only time you hear a vocal. Cozy Cole was a brilliant big band drummer, played with everybody who mattered. And just hear him say, Topsy Part 2. And then he goes, and just goes on and on and on. So we got hooked on that song. I eventually got a drum set. My brother, after I learned the chops, I showed my brother the chops. He became a phenomenal drummer, and that's what he was virtually his entire life. And then I wound up in some bands. In fact, my first band it was in about the end of my junior year, beginning of my senior year of high school. And that was my first rock and roll band. And I was in a couple of really good bands as a drummer, but actually I always enjoyed the recording process. I'm mixing up a lot of years now, going back and forth, forgive me, but I'm saying all of this extemporaneously. I always enjoyed the process of the recording studio more than the process of playing live. And I enjoyed being a critic more than I enjoyed being a drummer. And I became a critic in a really lovely way, and it's a wonderful memory for me. I was in a band that I put together with a British guitar player, and the band had just broken up, and I was kind of tired of playing the clubs and that sort of thing. And we were living in a beautiful part of New Jersey, just a few hundred feet from the Atlantic Ocean. And my wife saw this sign at the local soda shop, which was attached to the Acme supermarket. And it said, writers wanted for a new weekly fish wrapper, basically. That's what it was. It was weekly, community paper.
Right.
And I didn't want to be on the road. We had a young child, Emily.
Yeah.
And basically I just said, I don't want to be on the road anymore. I want to be pop. I want to be around. So I was working a record store and starting to write this column called Dr. Rock for a local fish wrapper.
Dr. Rock.
Dr. Rock. And you know how doctors used to have those little silver things on their forehead? I forget what they were called. Mine was a 45.
No way.
Okay. Yeah,
See, now that's a new story I've never heard from you.
Yeah, it was Dr. Rock. And then from that, very rapidly, because I wrote a good column, I wound up in freelance articles with the Asbury Park Press, Christian Science Monitor, Billboard Cashbox along the way, Trouser Press Magazine, which was a great Anglophile publication based out of New York. I was 21 years with the Press of Atlantic City as their music critic. From that suggestion that Diane had of, hey, why don't you write about it because you know it? And I started writing and reviewing albums from that. And within 18 months, I had credits all over the place. Interestingly, at one of the papers, it was the Christian Science Monitor, the editor asked me where I went to college and where I got my degree in media. And I said, I don't have any degree in journalism. And you know what he actually said to me? I'm paraphrasing, but I know it's a very accurate paraphrase. He said, that probably explains why you're a good writer and you have personality, because no one took it out of you.
Exactly. It's funny when you talk about writers, because kids come to me, they know I'm a writer and that I'm published. A lot of them at church, I have a couple that have been interested. They said, I'm thinking I want to go become a writer, so I think I'm going to take journalism. I'm like, I thought you said you wanted to be a writer. And they said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, journalism's not becoming a writer, it's becoming a reporter at best.
Now is a distorter.
I know. That rhymes. That's good. But yeah. I said, if you want to become a writer, major in English, and then whatever your field of interest is, minor in that, or even double major.
And let me interject there, Dave. Yeah. Write about what you know.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. But you've got to know how to be a good writer. So you need to get a degree in English, because one of the best sports writers that I know, and he runs the morning show out in KNBR, which is this big sports talk radio, the flagship of the San Francisco Giants and the San Francisco 49ers and the Golden State Warriors.
And you happen to be a fan of two of those.
Yeah, well, his name's Brian Murphy. He went to UCLA. He got a degree in English because he wanted to be a writer. And he wrote, Golf Digest. He wrote for, I think, ESPN for a while. And he actually got his gig as a sports talk radio guy calling in. But that's what I tell folks. I said, look, you got to learn how to write. You got to learn English. There's nothing worse than, I read some of these reporters and their structure is horrible.
Are you telling me some people don't speak more goodly irregardless?
Well, it's just, yeah. It's just, so then, like you said, though, you should write about what you enjoy. So if you like history, if you like, whatever, then you can get extra study in that area, or just because it's your hobby, you don't even need to take formal education. But if you want to be a good writer, you should learn English.
Well, let's face it. They invented the language, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And George Bernard Shaw and Shakespeare and a few others weren't bad.
Well, that's what I mean. Even if you want to be a good writer, you want to write novels, you want to write nonfiction, then you probably need to study those folks.
Well, it's a funny thing. With my old show, The Right Balance, I interviewed a lot of authors. One of my favorite was Frederick Forsyth.
I remember that.
One of the things that I find amazing about almost every British novelist or nonfiction writer I ever interviewed, almost all the stories they have one point in common. Where did you come up with the idea for doing this biography? Where did you come up with the idea for your novel? And almost all of them saying, I'm not exaggerating, well, it was in a pub. I was talking to some friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all of a sudden you find out how it started.
Well, it's funny, like with my book, Man Up, which was probably my most successful book. I got an interview with Dr. James Dobson. But the way that came by was, I believe it was a Monday night men's Bible study where my pastor said, men, we just got to man up. It's time to man up. And I thought, man, that's pretty good. And I just let that marinate up in my brain for a while. And then as I'm driving to work, I do a lot of thinking. I'll listen to music. And one by one, words with up came up, like look up, wake up. All these ups came up to my mind. I got 10 of them and I wrote chapters based off of that. So yeah, most good stories, most good books come from the most unlikely motivation or what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of it right now. But yeah, you're right. That's sometimes it's
Look,
just
it's really quite simple too. And I'm going to say this to anyone who's thinking of doing any writing or has done some. If you come up with a good idea, doesn't necessarily mean that good idea is going to become a short story right away or an editorial right away. You might just have a good idea. And a lot of times, especially at night when you go into bed, you have a great idea. Write it down, because I guarantee you at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the morning, you won't remember it. So take notes. And I would say basically, here's a bit of advice. If you have writer's block,
Mhm.
you know what your conclusion is. Whatever you're writing, if you're writing a criticism of an album or you're writing a short story, you pretty know who did the murder. You know, you've set it up in your brain, but you have writer's block in the middle of your book, your short story. Well, then you work backwards.
Yeah.
You go to the conclusion you have,
Yeah.
you know it's your conclusion.
Right.
And sometimes if you just work backwards rather than forwards, you can get you into gear again. But anyway, and in terms of, the passages of time, so there I was as Dr. Rock with my little 45 on the head, right? And a little cartoon character. I loved doing the column. Then 21 years with the Press of Atlantic City. The column was originally called The Vinyl Word. Vinyl
I like
Word.
that.
Yeah, well, that also reminds you of the era we're talking about, because it was still those 12-inch plastic records.
Right.
Sometimes, with the needle on the turntable would bounce up and down because the album got a little bit bumpy. And obviously, after that, I had to change the name to CDs of the Week. And then toward the end, I had a different publication. I was calling it Soundations. I use this phrase sometimes in trying to emphasize when you're writing about a band or a solo artist. I came up with a phrase called Soundations, meaning the foundation of their sound. So a band like, what's a good example? Aerosmith's foundation to a great extent was the Rolling Stones, because they were sort of imitative at first of the
Right.
Rolling Stones, that
Right.
sort of thing. So I used the phrase Soundations a lot, but I haven't been reviewing albums for a long time now. I'm very disappointed in the current nature of pop music in all its genres, pop music, soul music, whatever. We're living in a very derivative age. I really think that when I speak to a lot of younger people, people in my family, people I just know in everyday life, a lot of them say the same thing. I'd rather listen to the Doors, the Doobie Brothers. I'd rather listen to Creedence Clearwater, or the Beatles, the Who, because the music was better.
Right.
And I know a lot of people say, well, you're getting old. No, the fact is there are good eras for art. I mean, the Renaissance was a particularly good era.
Mhm.
Harlem Renaissance in this country for Black creativity was amazing. There are good eras and there are bad eras. The big band era was phenomenal in this country. Glenn Miller and all the others, Jimmy Lunsford and the Dorseys, you name it. It was a wonderful, wonderful era. Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Claude Thornhill, some really incredible bands. Then right after World War II, music wasn't very good. And thankfully, around 1954, along comes rock and roll. And it's still around. That's the amazing thing. It was supposed to be something that lasted 6 weeks. And rock and roll is still very much around. You look like you're doing something.
I'm trying to find something that my pastor left, because you said something to writers, pardon me for moving everything around. And he gave me this one little, two people gave me the best pieces of advice in writing. And he gave me something, it said, when you write, it should be sound and sacred. And I always forget the other S. But it made sense. The other one that I got, piece of advice, that actually I got that before from him, was from you. And you told me, do not fall in love with your writing and do not hate your writing. Because
let it breathe.
Huh?
Let it breathe.
Yeah. And then because that made so much sense to me, because you can take it very personal when you get rejected. Whether you're submitting a book or submitting a column and nobody likes it. I remember this one guy who who wanted to write for, I won't mention the person, but we know him, and I published on that person's website a few times. But he would not publish this person's work. And so this other person, this wannabe writer, emailed me and said, he won't publish anything. Would you look at my work and tell me why you think he won't publish my work? And I said, yeah, if you got big boy pants. Because I actually taught effective writing in the Army for 4 years at the Senior NCO Academy, and they used to call me the Master Blaster because I'd use red ink so much. And they, even as a joke, one class gave me a red spray can and put Master Blaster on it. But so I read it and it's horrible. Oh my! And GK, I'm telling you, I went easy on him, but I bled all over that thing, man. And he was so furious. I don't know if the person's even alive today after that.
Well, the funny thing is, Dave, that I know exactly what you're talking about, because in the days that I was writing a weekly record review column, there'd be local artists who would send me a demo tape or something pressed as a 45 or an album or an EP. And every so often it was really terrible. And I always, my attitude was I would tell them gently, and if it was bad, I would not put it in print. I wasn't about to squash the little guy or dash anybody's hopes.
Right.
I was always try to find something in their work that was good and emphasize that and just let them know they're not ready yet. And it was a very, very difficult thing to do. But my greatest joy as a critic was not reviewing Bruce Springsteen or Elton John, the guys who were established. They didn't need my words.
Right.
My favorite thing was finding the new band.
Yeah.
Tom Petty before anybody knew him. That sort of.
Yeah. And that's one of your great talents is you have such a keen eye for talent. And you encouraged me. Actually, the very first blog was not Salt and Light. That was sponsored originally by our previous guest, Rod Martin, but it was one that I came up with, and it was really, really rudimentary. But you gave me the idea called Right Face. You remember when I wrote that old blog way back when?
Oh my word, yeah.
I still have that stuff somewhere. And Lance Fairchalk wrote for me, and that was my very, very first blog. And then you introduced me to Rod, and he sponsored my big blog, Salt and Light, which I still have today. I don't put much content on it, but it still gets visitors all the time. But
the thing I've always been good at is coming up with names for things.
Yeah.
I think the final word was certainly a good one.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories of something messing up, among the things I've done as a freelancer, at various points, I've also been a food critic, restaurant critic. And this one paper I was writing for briefly, and you'll understand why it was brief. I moved to another paper. I was going to do a column, and it was going to be called the Mystery Month. Okay, I didn't want my name attached to it. I was sort of a man of mystery. The whole thing was just kind of schlocky, deliberately schlocky. Well, along comes the first column, the Mystery Month, and guess what? Greg Allen underneath it. Give my name, because sometimes I write as G.K. and sometimes I write as Greg. Okay, and the fact of the matter is that there went the name of the column. It's no longer, but it forced me to go to another publication, and I came up with one of the great names. I really do believe the purpose when I was a food critic was not to go to the fancy schmancy places and go on and do poetry. Oh, the escargot, they were served at a snail's pace. Nothing like that. I wanted to write for the working guy and gal. Where can you get a good breakfast or lunch? Really good food, really good prices, nothing fancy, but good food at good prices. And I think I came up with the best name I ever had for any of my food columns, Forklifts.
Ah, very good.
Was that a good name or not?
Hey, you're still good at finding those places, because anytime we come down where you're at, we're always going to somewhere good.
But yeah, and the funny thing is, to the COVID thing, I was just glad when we went to Grillsmith for those incredible meals. They make an incredible. Anyone who's in the Tampa Bay area, there's 3 or 4 of them. Grillsmith is a nice, I would call it casual plus in its environment.
Yeah,
Not a hole in the wall.
Yeah,
and it's got one of those menus that vegetarian, there's something for you. If you want something more European, it's for you. If you want a basic American burger, and they do it all exceptionally well. And they make, I think, the best cheeseburger in the Tampa Bay area.
Yeah, it was one of the best burgers, and I'm a burger aficionado.
Oh, I love. To me, that one of my favorite Chuck Berry song is living in the USA, back in the USA, and you never can tell. My 2 favorite songs is, but in the one song where he goes, I'm so happy to be living in the USA where hamburgers sizzle on an open grill night and day. Yeah. I love that poetry. Chuck Berry, I know we talked about it earlier in another episode, but Chuck Berry, as far as I'm concerned, was really rock and roll's first genuine poet, because he just didn't write Moon, Spoon, June, Oh Baby, Baby, Baby. He wrote songs that actually dealt to some degree with race, with divorce, and other things. And he also had a lot of humor. And he was an extremely good and very effective songwriter. Because when you go back to the original rock and roll era, most of the artists, most of their songs, they didn't write.
Yeah.
Jerry Lee Lewis wrote some. Elvis put his name on a few, but by and large, Elvis Presley was not a songwriter. Yeah. Elvis Presley made money for songwriters and for himself. But Chuck Berry was really, in a sense, the first self-contained major hit maker in rock and roll. Try to find a band, especially the British bands, from the early 60s to the present day that Chuck Berry didn't influence, because he influenced generations of people, and he should have been given his propers upon his death. I don't think the American media basically spent enough time honoring him, because yes, he was a flawed person. Most people are. He was a brilliant artist, wrote some great songs.
Well, that was brilliant, because I was going to figure out how we were going to bring it back. And I was just going to say, well, food is like music to us, but you brought it back better than I could have ever engineered it. So, hey, I think we're going to go ahead and close this episode off. We've been going at it for over 30 minutes.
I've made myself hungry.
I know, right? But here's the neat thing. We meandered, we went down memory lane, and we got some good musings from you. I think this is going to be fun. I mean, we do want to have a lot of special guests, and we're booking some great ones, and we're out reaching out to other folks. And like I told you all, if you guys got somebody you'd like to see us interview, go to our website, mindingthemedia.com, and hit the contact page and give me some ideas of maybe somebody we can reach out to, or a topic you want us to talk about, or maybe you have a particular band or genre of music you want GK to muse over. But beware, if you don't like it, you ain't gonna like what he has to say about it. So
yeah, even though I spent a lot of my life at the Jersey Shore, to me, Bruce Springsteen is basically BS.
That's so funny you say that, because I used to be a huge fan of his, and he's
a hypocrite in the way he lives and the way he sings and the way he presents himself.
Well, that's all of them, though. But I tell you what, I saw him in 1986 in Germany, and it was quite the show. But anyhow, all right, my friend. Hey, thanks. This was great. This is gonna be fun. We're gonna go this way. We're not gonna do it all the time, but like I said, I think it's nice to kind of change it up a little bit with our episode with
well, people can be conservative, 1 or 2 members of the Ramones were conservative.
Well, and that's a great point too. I know you always make that point, that a lot of people don't think that, when people hear we're conservative, they don't even know what that is. They think we're like aliens, but we're human beings. We like music.
Hey, look, 2 of my songs that I co-wrote with my buddy Rafael Fuentes, were recorded by a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
That's right. And you know what? We should get Raphael on sometime, because that would be
I've been speaking to him about it, and we want to wait for the right moment.
Right.
But in fact, we were talking about it today. And at some point,
be funny to get you two. I'll just sit back and let you two go.
Oh my God, the way he could blackmail me.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be fun. All right, folks. Well, hey, listen, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our podcast. It's out on everywhere, should be by now. And also our YouTube channel is up and coming. You can subscribe to those. We're putting out these videos and they'll be on Rumble. And we have a Facebook page, Mining the Media. You can go there and follow us. I haven't really started up on Twitter. I do have a Twitter page. I'm going to get up on Instagram just because I know all you social media alkalites like to run there. And so we'll get there eventually, but we're just launching. What you can help us do, though, is subscribe, leave us a nice 5-star rating, let all your friends know. Please let all your friends know. And the more subscribers we get in the first couple of weeks, that's going to be big for us. And we sure appreciate you. Again, visit our website, miningthemedia.com. Thanks, folks. We'll catch you next time around.